Hello and welcome to day 3 of the Good Food Conference. We are so delighted you've joined us. Our theme for today is Eyes on the Road, and I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Jess Krieger. Jess has been working toward bringing cultivated meat to consumers for 11 years, and she is actually the first person in the world to pursue a PhD to research cultivated meat. She was one of the first New Harvest Fellows, joining the program in 2016 to work on cultivated pork. She has broad experience in the cultivated meat technology and product development space. And in 2019, she co-founded Artemis Foods as Chief Science Officer. There, she created the Artemis Burger, a cultivated beef burger. And in 2020, she co-founded Ohayo Valley as Chief Executive Officer. This company is focused on developing cultivated steak. She is a TEDx speaker, and her work has been featured in the Financial Times, Food Navigator, and the MIT Technology Review. Jess, I am so delighted you're able to join us this morning.
Thank you. So great to be here.
So my first question, I'm interested to hear from you. What led you to found Ohayo Valley?
Well, an unstoppable will. But first, before we get into that, I just want to say how grateful I am to GFI for driving so much momentum, support, and education in the alternative protein industry. It's incredible to be a part of this global movement, which are the blossoming fruits of labor of decades of campaigning for environmental justice and animal welfare. And really, my journey in starting Ohayo Valley actually began with Bruce. I was a young neuroscience student at university, and I started learning about animal use in research, and it made me start thinking more about the use of animals in our lives, and specifically with animal agriculture. And years ago, Bruce produced some resources that linked the environmental impact of animal agriculture to climate change and animal welfare. And when I saw those resources, it completely changed my life. I changed my field, and I started thinking, this is something that we have to figure out. We have to figure out how we can create sustainable solutions for alternative protein products. But back then, 11 years ago, plant-based meat was not as good as it is now. And it became clear to me that another solution is needed. So I had this crazy idea one day after thinking about this for months that maybe we could lean on science fiction and produce animal meat by using cell culture technology and produce it in a more efficient, more sustainable way, and give people the products that they want, but just producing them in a better way. So that was the beginning of a long journey for me. I knew that I needed to start a company to do this because we had to scale this technology and commercialize it so we can take up a good market share of the overall global meat industry. But I also had no idea what to do at that time because it was pre-industry, pre-cultivated meat industry. Right. And I decided to become a scientist to figure out technologically, how are we going to do this? So for 7 or 8 years, I did research, and I started a PhD program to develop the technology platform for cultivated meat. So in the course of my career, I started Artemis Foods, which was focused on developing a ground beef burger, the Artemis Burger. And my product design for that product was to blend plant-based meat and cultivated meat together. But the Artemis Burger was actually a very easy product to work on. The ground meat products are, the simplest and the quickest to commercialize and develop. But where I saw that there were still major issues is the ability to produce whole cuts of meat, and specifically beef. Beef has a complex tissue structure because you have two types of tissue. You have intramuscular fat, which is the marbling of beef, and then you have these aligned skeletal muscle fibers. And so you have to develop a method to co-manufacture these two types of tissue together. And during my PhD, I'm actually a tissue engineer by training, and I learned so much about the technology that, bioprinting and tissue engineering was promising. But it also seemed to me that that technology was further away than what we could possibly do by combining plant-based meat and cultivated meat together. So this is a very interesting type of product for us to work on. I like working on challenging things. And we're first focused on producing a Wagyu ribeye product. And we're focused on Wagyu because it is one of the most premium, luxurious types of beef that is on the market. And when we create a alternative solution for Wagyu from cattle, then that's really going to convince people that cultivated meat is more than just, something that we can do for ground meat products. It's really going to convince people that, this is fully a solution. And we don't have to sacrifice the quality of life to try cultivated meat products. You can have your steak. And Ohio Valley is a cultivated beef company. Wagyu ribeye is just going to be the beginning, but we also want to be able to sell our products in McDonald's. So if you want to go to McDonald's one day, you could have an Ohio Valley burger. If you feel like, going on a nice date with your partner at a fancy restaurant, then you can try Ohio Valley Wagyu. And the reason that we're focused on beef is because beef is the most environmentally destructive type of livestock in intensive agriculture. And we have to create a comprehensive solution for beef as a form of protein. 41% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are released by the livestock industry come from beef. So clearly, this is a huge impact that we'll develop these solutions for. Beef in particular produces a lot of methane, and methane has a higher warming potential than carbon dioxide. And by producing cultivated beef products, we'll be able to reduce methane emissions and have a faster impact on climate change in general in reducing global warming overall.
Incredible. It has been a long time since I've had a ribeye steak, but I am really looking forward to trying one of yours. Yes. For all of those environmental reasons, plus it sounds delicious. Mm-hmm. So I'm really interested in hearing, our theme today is Eyes on the Road. So where are we going now that we've kind of envisioned all of the things that we have in days 1 and 2 of this conference? I'm interested to hear from you, Jess. What are you focused on as near-term milestones for your company?
Sure. Well, there's activities that the company are focused on, but then ways that milestones that we can hit that will support the industry at large. Specifically for Ohio Valley, we're going to be developing the product prototypes. And like I mentioned, we'll be starting with Wagyu ribeye, using a blended product strategy that will be the quickest and the easiest to commercialize. Essentially, plant-based meat provides a texture and a bite and a mouthfeel to alternative protein products. And we can use the cells as a flavoring component to really provide that umami and that juiciness and that beefy flavor. So in this way, we'll be able to combine the best of both worlds into one. But additionally, over the next few years, we'll be building our team and our company culture that's really centered around innovation, tenacity, and a strong sense of ethics. In terms of the broader picture, we want to find a way to support diverse industry stakeholders whose ways of life could be disrupted. My journey through creating alternative beef products began because I partnered with a small family farm in Ohio. And it was it's a beautiful farm. It's actually one of my favorite places, and it has historical significance for me. And we created a partnership with the husband and wife who ran this farm, and we were able to financially support them. We took tissue biopsies from their animals. They had this very small herd of well cared for animals, and we could financially compensate them for those tissue biopsies. And we were able to pay them between $1,000 to $3,000 per tissue biopsy. And this is really important because it provides a financial incentive for small farmers to partner with cultivated meat companies. And there isn't just this extra monetary incentive, but there's also an issue that we can provide a solution for these small cattle farms. And that's that, for the most part, they're selling their cattle at a loss per head. It's not a super profitable industry. And, many farmers, they may get, $250, $300 per head of cattle. And that's why the industry is incredibly subsidized. So we can actually make these small farms profitable as they partner with cultivated meat companies. So we would like to show this vision and this model to the world. So stay tuned. There will be more details coming. But additionally, workforce development is a theme that has been discussed all throughout this conference. And it is incredible to see how far a developing workforce has come just in the last few years. But one of the issues that I had when I was coming up is I didn't have female role models in the cultivated meat industry. And it was hard to see representation. And I would like to I'm going to start a mentoring community for aspiring women in STEM who are interested in cultivated meat. And in this way, we'll be able to support workforce development and the progression of their careers.
That's amazing. I think there's so many young women who are excited about this field and really do need mentorship and that kind of leadership. And diversifying the workforce is such an important part of what we're all doing together. Now, we only have another couple minutes before we need to transition into the next piece. I realize I jumped into this in all of my excitement without introducing myself. I am the Vice President of Policy at the Good Food Institute, and that explains my last question for you, Jess, which is, what public policies could address the biggest obstacles that you see to the cultivated meat industry?
I'll try to wrap this up quickly. So I have two main points. And the first is, it was amazing to see members of the NSF give talks at this conference. I have some suggestions for them in terms of funding startups. SBIR funding is critical for academics moving into the entrepreneurial and industry sector, and prioritizing climate friendly tech startups, I think, is one way to really start pushing the needle forward and increasing SBIR funding to companies such as cultivated meat companies or plant-based meat companies, alternative protein companies. But additionally, I would not be here if I had not had funding for my research during my PhD. I was a New Harvest Fellow. New Harvest funded a PhD project for me, and it allowed me to have the freedom to exclusively focus on cultivated meat research. And I learned so much in those 3 years, and it really accelerated my ability to learn enough and build the technology enough that I could become an entrepreneur and really launch that technology and everything that I learned. So I'm also very excited to see that the NSF has started funding universities such as UC Davis and their cultivated meat consortium. I hope to see more of that in the future.
Absolutely, me too. And Jess, it's been so great to be, present with you at congressional briefings and briefings of staff members on the Hill to really push forward open access research for alternative proteins generally, but especially cultivated meat. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you, Jess. I'm now pleased to cede the floor to two additional special guests. First, we're going to have some brief remarks from Johnny Ream. He's a partner at Stray Dog Capital, and he'll be talking about what he sees as critical next steps. And that conversation will be followed by a conversation that my colleague, Caroline Bushnell, our Vice President of Corporate Engagement, had recently with Amy Chen, the COO of Upside Foods. So let's listen in.
Hi all, my name is Johnny Ream and I'm a partner at Stray Dog Capital. We're a venture fund focused on catalyzing innovative and emerging startups in the alternative protein ecosystem. We've been investing in this space since about 2015 and have over 40 companies that we've invested in throughout that time. And I'm thankful that GFI has given us a chance just to share a few brief thoughts on how we as investors are assessing the state of progress in the alternative protein space. So our goal is to use capital to help bring products that are as good or better and competitively priced with existing animal-based products. We think that those two elements, product quality and price parity, will ultimately drive adoption at the widest scale. It's already been demonstrated that you can have meaningful market share and build successful alternative protein companies with one of those elements. But if we want to go beyond that, just building successful companies and dramatically transform our food system, we really need to have both. And that means fantastic products that resonate with the broad market at price points that are accessible by the majority of people. And that's really what we're after at Stray Dog Capital. So as we look to development in this space, there are a couple of indicators that we look to for signals of progress. One widely used metric that we also use is just looking at overall market share of plant-based products. We're seeing great growth of plant-based market share in a number of categories. That's a signal that more offerings are coming to market that are leading to greater customer adoption. Another early signal that we look to is venture capital dollars allocated to alternative proteins. And so this can be a strong signal about the degree to which investors feel there are market shaping opportunities in the ecosystem that can dramatically impact our food system. This is particularly helpful in the cultivated meat space, where almost every company is pre-revenue and thus, sales data doesn't exist. So we can gauge the outlook and the progress by the total venture capital investment over time. And then lastly, I think it's worth noting for cultivated meat specifically, we also look at a number of key technical metrics within the space to gauge continued development. So for instance, cell-based media presents the largest cost factor. Are we getting the price per liter down over time? Other metrics, cell doubling time, cell yields, achievement of larger bioreactor volume. These are important indicators to watch as we progress. And I can generally say that we have been seeing improvement on those metrics over time. But more broadly speaking, where do we really see ourselves at this point in time? Well, if we look at investment in alternative proteins in 2020, GFI has put together some fantastic data. I will recap it just very quickly. 2020, we had $3.1 billion in investment overall in alternative proteins. And that came from $2.1 billion in plant-based food. That was 3 times the investment of the previous year. $600 million came investment in fermentation for alternative protein. And that was 2x what we saw in 2019. And then there was about $400 million invested in cultivated meat, which in 2020 accounted for about 3/4 of all funding we've ever seen in the space. So that's $3.1 billion in alt proteins with some very significant growth rates. And it signals strong innovation. But if we look at a comp, if we take the renewable energy space, this is an area of critical need. It's obvious. We can see that in 2020, according to Bloomberg, investment from private and public sources in energy transition totaled about $500 billion. So as we look at both of those metrics comparatively speaking, funding in alternative proteins is seeing less than 1% of the funding levels that are present in renewable energy and energy transition. And what this shows us is that despite the growth to date, we believe there is significantly more capacity for innovation in alternative proteins to accelerate development. Private investors and venture funds will certainly play a part here, but it really will require involvement from a range of public and private institutions. We need governments to invest in programs that will drive more research and development and fund significant capital expenditures that will be required to achieve scale. Infrastructure is going to be a big deal here. Universities are going to need to invest in students to educate them on the need for alternative protein solutions, and then have programs in place that can prepare them to tackle challenges in this space. And other institutions and perhaps philanthropic organizations, we need them to invest in open access research and grants that can stimulate R&D efforts and support further scientific progress. So all in all, to recap, the growth in alt proteins to date has been significant. We've been really excited about the growth that we've seen. But given our population increase and the current meat consumption levels and the market share progress that we need to make, it's really imperative that we activate more resources to foster more innovation that will help us accelerate transition to a new food system. And so with that, from all of us at Stray Dog Capital, we look forward to partnering with you, many of you in this space, in the months and years to come as we work together to transform the way we feed our world. Thank you so much to GFI for putting on such a fantastic program, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.
Good morning, Amy. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm thrilled to spend some time together. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You know, I must say I was really excited when I first saw the announcement that you were going to be joining Upside Foods, particularly because of your deep experience in food and beverage from 14 years at PepsiCo. And it's really exciting to see veteran CPG experience entering the cultivated meat sector. And, you know, I know it's only been a couple months since you've joined, but I'd love to hear a bit more about the first things you've been focused on and what you're really hoping to accomplish in your first 6 months, year, especially as we, you know, look towards the broad commercialization of cultivated meat.
Sure, absolutely. It's been an amazing journey already. I have to say, I've been following the industry for many years. And if you asked me 5 years ago, I would probably say this was almost science fiction. But it's very clear over the last couple of years as the industry has accelerated that this is real. And it's an amazing time to be joining not only Upside Foods as the company, but also the cultivated meat industry, because I think it's this really amazing kind of inflection point where we are going from the concept and the science and technology as a company has been the focus for the last few years, and literally proving out the science, right? Can you make cells grow and become delicious meat? And I think we're past that stage where we know that's true. And now we're into this amazing phase of bringing that to the world and bringing it to the consumers. So as we think about that transition from what we're calling sort of an R&D and a science organization into also being a commercial and consumer organization, there's a number of things that are top of my list. I would say one is really about scaling and scaling the culture of Upside Foods and what's made it so special so far. There's just an incredible sense of passion and mission among the team here. You know, people are here for the reason of changing the world. And that's something that's so special and has been kind of woven into our DNA. So as we think about growing from 100 people and to 200 to 500 and what's going to be really required to impact the world in the way that we want, how do we make sure that the culture stays the same? So we're always hiring for really incredible, passionate, committed, curious people. So I'll put in a shameless plug that there's always plenty of positions open, but definitely people and talent and culture are top of my list. If I think more from a commercial perspective, the industry is in an interesting inflection point in terms of being a little bit familiar to consumers, but not totally understood. And so we have an opportunity ahead of us to make sure that people understand what this is, right? If there's something that I've learned from my experience in food, it's that people want food to be food. They want it to be delicious and craveable and familiar and to fit into the traditions that they've loved. And so we have an opportunity here to say, this is the meat that you've always loved, but made in a new way, in a more humane and sustainable way. So a lot of the groundwork that we need to lay as an industry and also as a company is really about helping to educate consumers around who we are, what we are, and how this fits into their lives.
That's great. And I'm sure many people in our audience are happy to hear there will be many positions still being filled in the organization. And so, yeah, that leads into one of the next things I was going to ask you, right? With all the experience you have in the food and beverage industry, are there any really other lessons that you've learned that you think are really important as you move towards these milestones?
Yeah, I touched on one of them just around food. First and foremost, this is food, and we need to talk about it like food and romance it like food. And I think there's a role for brand to help tell a narrative and a story about what this is. That's really, really powerful. And so the science is amazing, and the science is an enabler. And there's some folks who will want to go really, really deep into the science and understand the technology behind how meat is cultivated. And there's other people who will just want to know that this is an amazing thing that I can cook in my grandmother's favorite recipe. And so I think the opportunity ahead of us is to make food that's delicious and craveable and that meets people where they are, that has to act like food and deliver what food needs to do first and foremost, which is delicious, craveable, nourishing. And then there needs to be a level of transparency. I mean, I think what's exciting about consumers, and particularly the emerging class of consumers, is that they care a lot more about where their food comes from and the impact that their food has on the world. So this to me is just a golden opportunity for us to tell our story. It hits on all of the points around deliciousness that food needs to deliver, but wait, there's all these other amazing things. It's more sustainable for the world. It's great for animal welfare, right? It allows you to have the meat that you love without the compromise that's required with conventional systems right now. And so I think being able to tell that story with transparency is really important. People want to understand where their food came from. They want to understand the backdrop. They want to understand the impact on the world. And so I think that combination of romancing it like food and marketing it like food, but also bringing in this sort of new generation of transparency and conversation around where food comes from is a really perfect marriage.
And so it sounds like you've got some great marketing ideas here, and you've talked about the importance of transparency. So are there any novel ways that you're going to be letting consumers kind of inside the process as part of your marketing? And also, can we expect to see any kind of splashy marketing campaigns in the coming year or so from you all?
Yeah, I can't tell too many details, but we will have a production facility opening up shortly. And one of the things that we're really excited about is that it's a production facility that's in the middle of a neighborhood and a community. And there's this beautiful juxtaposition of life, that kind of urban life that goes on. And the fact that you could have a modern meat production facility in the middle of that, I think just shows new ways of conceptualizing how food production can fit into our lives in a really systemic and organic way. So we'd love to open up once we're ready to do so, our facility to tours and to have folks kind of come through and see and experience really meat made the modern way.
Very exciting. And on the topic of milestones, it sounds like the production facility is going to be a huge one. Are there other scientific milestones that you all are looking to achieve in the near term?
I think one of the biggest things that's probably on everybody's minds is regulatory approval, because that's really the green light that allows us to bring our consumers to our products to the world. And I think that's going to be a watershed moment for the industry, because that's when we go from concept and idea into something that people can taste and feel and see on their plates. So that's a major milestone that's coming. The production facility for us absolutely will be an opportunity for us to show that cultivated meat can be cultivated at scale, and at a scale that is also scalable beyond these initial scales. So I think that's a really important part of the journey, which is not only showing the sort of first proof of concept that we've done over the last 5 years around can cells be made into delicious meat. This next phase is, can we make that at scale in meaningful quantities? And then once we get regulatory approval, I think the sky's the limit in terms of being able to bring that to the world and to show how versatile the product is, how delicious it is, how it kind of fits into people's daily routines.
That's great. And so thinking about once we hit that first milestone of regulatory approval in the US and, offering the cultivated chicken for sale, is there anything you can share with us about what that might look like, where that might be for sale, what kind of milestones beyond the very first ability to purchase to broader dissemination and distribution in the marketplace?
Yeah, I can't quite share too many of the details now, except to say that there will be much coming. We just signed a partnership with Dominique Chen, who's a 3 Michelin star chef out in the Bay Area. And she's got an incredible story, but she is one of a few women in the world who have 3 Michelin stars, and she's an incredible connoisseur of food, as you would imagine. She took meat off of her menu a few years ago because she didn't like how it was made. And so as we've worked in partnership with her, there's been amazing culinary collaborations. But one of the things that she's also very excited about doing is bringing meat back to the menu with Upside Food. So that'll be one of the places that will feature our products. And we're working on a whole slate of ways to introduce the product to the world in new ways.
That's really exciting. Thank you for sharing that.
Really?
So looking ahead, all the way to 2050, let's say, I imagine cultivated meat will by then have captured a very significant share of the market. So I'm curious if you have any viewpoints on that and how much market share you think ultimately you and your industry colleagues in the cultivated meat sector might capture of the total protein market.
I don't know that I have a crystal ball. I wish I did. But one of the things that I think drew me to the industry was just the potential for this to really be a meaningful tipping point. I think when you think about alternative proteins, one of the biggest challenges has always been around taste and about how close this can get to real meat. And the beauty of cultivated meat is that it is real meat. So you take that compromise off the table. And I think when you talk to a consumer and you offer them the meat that they love, and you can say that this was made without slaughtering an animal in a way that was better for the environment and that's better for overall human health and animal welfare. I think there's very few consumers who would say like, you know what, I'm not interested in that. So it gives me a lot of confidence that if we develop the industry in the right way, I think the sky is the limit in terms of what consumers will do and how they'll react. There's a lot of things, of course, that are required to make that happen, from the regulatory approval that we talked about. I think this consumer education piece is really critical. We've got one opportunity to educate consumers in the right way about who we are. And I think that requires not only transparency and opening up our doors and also kind of our processes so people understand how the meat is made, but also being able to explain the safety of the product. And here is the sustainability footprint, but really giving people visuals and kind of a lens into the inside workings, if you will, I think will be really important.
That's great. Yeah, you mentioned a couple times the importance of introducing the product the right way, and you detailed there some of what you see needs to happen. Would there be anything else that you think is important as the industry coalesces around how to bring, a new and novel product to market for the first time?
Yeah, I think part of it is about explaining the product and what it is. Even the nomenclature and what you call it is important. Like, is it clear to consumers? I think consistency around the overall quality of the product and the processes is important. And of course, at the end of the day, taste is going to be king and queen. But I think what's really heartening to me is just understanding how consumers, and particularly younger consumers, are reacting. And so if you think about the Generation Z, I never feel as old as I do when I talk to folks in Gen Z. But when I talk to teenagers and folks in their early 20s about how they make decisions and how they think about their place in the world and the importance of the choices that they make, this is a generation that truly believes that their choices matter. And that they are responsible for the future of humanity and in all of its senses, and responsible for being stewards of the world. And so they're so comfortable with technology and the role of technology and innovation in driving change and sustainability that they don't blink an eye. I've had so many of these conversations with younger folks, and I'll kind of explain to them, like, here's what cultivated meat is. What do you think about it? And they'll pause for a second. They're like, oh, that sounds amazing. I would try it. And it's literally that really quick process of, let me explain to you what it is, what it's not, and why it might be interesting and why it's better for the world. And I think in fairly short order, we can convince younger generations to jump on board. And I think it's going to be a process as we think about tipping points and how do you move the needle, and when is that kind of critical moment where everything aligns, right? Consumer acceptance is there. There's brands that people trust, which is a lot of what we're doing with Upside, is creating a brand that's aspirational and inspirational, but that also telegraphs the role that people can play through very simple choices like eating meat or what meat they eat, and make a better world out of it. So we create inspiring brands. We are transparent. We're clear about who we are. Cost obviously has to get in line and to a palatable level, and then availability, and then we're off to those.
That's great. So based on everything you just said there, it sounds like we can expect cultivated meat to ultimately capture a very significant share of the market, particularly with those generational changes and as Gen Z increases in purchasing power. And to your point about, inspirational, it's right there in the name. So, congratulations on the somewhat recent now rebrand to Upside Foods. It's been great to see.
Thank you so much. Absolutely.
I did want to ask one other question on this point. So, to get to that ultimate place, say in 2050, are there any other technological milestones that are really important that we hit? You did talk about cost. I don't know, if there's any key cost drivers that you're particularly focused on in the production process, or anything else that we should be watching out for there.
Yeah, I think in general, the overall supply chain is going to need to evolve with the industry. And so we've spent a lot of time at Upside Foods kind of looking across the entire process value chain, if you will, at what's required from the moment you procure a cell all the way to the time it ends up on a consumer's table, and identifying a lot of those points where traditional inputs and supply chains aren't sufficient or aren't delivering at the level of cost that we need it to. So there is work to be done. I don't want to trivialize the journey from here till 2050 and all that has to happen for the industry to scale in the right way. But things like reducing media costs and bringing that to a level that's acceptable is something that we spent a lot of time on. The actual equipment, right? How do you develop the right kind of cultivators to grow meat in ways that are not only clean and sterile and safe, but also efficient. And so when you think about that entire process and all the way through to food formulation and making delicious flavors and final products, I think there's things that have to happen along every step of the way. And lots of that is going to mean developing supply chains and new ecosystems for products and for components that didn't exist before. So there is a lot of work to be done as we scale. But I think opening up our first production facility and innovation center in the next few months will be a big milestone. And then from there, we're going to learn a tremendous amount and continue to iterate and evolve and refine. But we've already got an eye towards commercial facilities that are of much larger scale that are coming in the future. So I think when you pair that kind of drumbeat of technological improvement across that entire development chain with costs coming down and hopefully a regulatory system that will catch up, then I think the next few years will be busy but full, and we're excited about being a really important part of transforming the food system as we know it.
Absolutely. Well, that all sounds very exciting. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share as we think about, the role that cultivated meat will ultimately play in our food system and how we get there?
One of the things that I've thought a lot about, particularly as I was joining Upside Foods, is this notion of a big tent and this idea that it will take all kinds. And I think what's really exciting, frankly, about the ecosystem of protein now is that there is so much innovation in the space. And there's innovation in conventional meat production and methods. There's innovation in alternative plant-based proteins. There's new innovation in cultivated meats. And I think it's actually tremendously exciting and a really beautiful ecosystem that's evolving of people rethinking the way that meat makes it to the table. So I'm excited that cultivated meat can play a real leadership role, and Upside Foods is excited about continuing to help lead and catalyze the industry to move in big directions. But I think there's interesting collaborations. I think ultimately all of these will coexist in some form. And so it's exciting to see the future start to unveil before our eyes. But you've got players like Cargill and Tyson, which we're privileged to call as investors, who are jumping into the space and thinking really creatively and innovatively about protein as well. And so I'm excited just to see the ecosystem evolve. And I think ultimately it's going to be important for consumers who are going to vote with their taste buds to have choices that they love and are excited about and that are better for the world. So I think it's all upside from here.
That's perfect. Thank you. And it ties into kind of what we say at GFI, that we're reimagining protein, right? So thank you so much for your work and the work of everyone at Upside Foods, and for taking the time to chat with me today. I learned a lot, and it's been a pleasure.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Caroline. It was great to be together.
Well, those are some inspiring conversations. Jess, I'm curious if there's anything that you heard that you wanted to reflect on.
You know, I really loved the comment about consumers voting with their taste buds. You know, this is really an opportunity for us to create delicious and sustainable solutions. And we haven't been able to do that in the past. So it's just very exciting to be part of this industry in this moment where this is really going to be possible and we can truly change things.
I agree. And this idea of a big tent and the growing ecosystem of alternative proteins is so inspiring. I think many of us 5 years ago, not you, because you were already well on your way, but for many of us, this did sound like science fiction 5 years ago. And we are so much closer to reality now, having this diverse and sustainable food ecosystem. So it's super exciting. Well, this wraps up our plenary today. We've got another series of in-depth sessions on deck, starting with cultivated meats path to market. Join me and regulators from Singapore and the United States, as well as a food regulatory attorney, to discuss the ins and outs of what it's going to take to use regulation to bring food to market. We also have a panel on label censorship, which is another hot topic, which we've heard touched on the last couple of days, and expert-rich panels on infrastructure and sensory solutions, as well as how alternative seafood can play a key role in ocean policy. And stick with us till the end of the day. We'll have a special one-on-one with our President Bruce Friedrich and New York Times Ezra Klein. And additionally, don't forget to take advantage of the networking opportunities and the booths in our expo hall. So that is a wrap for this. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you back here at the end of the day. Thank you.
Bye.